Hey everybody, it's Norman Will back for another episode of Behind the Garage Door. Today, we're going to go downstairs into our beautiful showroom, talk to Mr. Hurley about, out of all the cars he owns, why this particular one is his favorite one to drive. Hey, Steve.
Hello, Norm.
Thank you so much taking the time and bringing in your beautiful. Okay, I have to be perfectly honest with you. I've heard of TR8s, I've heard of TR6s, I've heard of Spitfires. I had never heard of one of these until you bought it and brought it here. Please tell us everything about this car.
A lot of people have not heard of the Stag because they built them from 1970 to 1977 in the UK. And they only imported them to the U.S. from 1971, 1972, and 1973. 73, the last year, which is what this example is. This is a Mark II, and you can tell because it's got the alloy wheels.
Okay.
The 71s and 72s, the Mark Is had wire wheels, and a few other changes that they made for 1973. So overall, they imported less than 2,800 to the United States.
Wow.
They had some issues with it. Wasn't really designed for the heat in the United States. So there's some cooling issues that caused some problems.
It's a lot cooler in England.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it caused some problems. And so, but actually, when you address those cooling concerns, they're very, very reliable cars. They're great driving cars, and they have a tremendous following in the UK. People love these cars. This was originally designed to compete, if you can believe it, with the SL Mercedes. So it's a very upscale entry for Triumph at the time when they developed this car in the late 60s. And the people at British Leyland, which for those who don't know, British Leyland is the General Motors of Triumph, MG, Austin Healey, all owned by
parent company.
Right, that's the parent company is British Leyland. You can see the little blue moniker on the fender. That's British Leyland, like you'd have a GM tag right there on a Camaro maybe.
Right, same thing, yeah.
So the people at British Leyland wanted to have an upscale entry, and they actually commissioned the company to make an engine just for this car. It's a 3-liter iron block aluminum overhead cam V8 with side draft Stromberg carburetors.
Really?
Zenith Stromberg carbs. And so
it's got a little V8 in there.
So exactly. And so a lot of people call it two TR7 engines because it's the same general architecture of a TR7 engine, but there are two of them. If you look at the 4-cylinder overhead cam TR7 engine, it's very much like this engine in the Stag.
That's
so
cool.
This is made to be more of a what they call a grand touring car.
It's got a back seat.
It's got a back seat. It has a removable hardtop. This entire hardtop comes off, and it has a soft top under the tonneau cover.
You're kidding, like a Corvette.
Exactly. But they were concerned about safety because that became, in the late 60s, early 70s, safety was becoming a greater and greater concern for car manufacturers. And so it actually has a T-bar, a rollover type bar, almost like a Mustang Shelby of the late 60s.
Yeah.
But it actually has a T-bar, and that stays in place when the top is off. And as does the door frame, which is a little bit unusual.
What a slick design.
Yeah, it's very, very unique.
Wow.
This is magenta. This is the original color. This car actually has a pretty good story I can tell you briefly. This car was owned by a British Leyland dealer in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The owner of the dealership owned the car, loved the car, kept it in his showroom, drove it until he was in his 90s. The car ended up, after he passed, the car worked its way out to Bruce Canepa out in California, and he's a high-end car dealer out in California. He had the car. They did a few mechanical upgrades and that kind of thing just to get it up to current driving standards. Yeah. And most of the paint was, when they put it up for sale and I saw the car, and I'd followed this car before he even had it. I've known of this car for many years before I bought it, which was several years ago now. But it had mostly original paint, all original interior. There are a few things that weren't as correct when I got the car, so I wanted it to be really nice. And let me backtrack a minute. The reason that I know about these cars and I'm so attached to these cars is back when I was autocross racing in the early 80s, 40 years ago, and had my Austin Healey Sprite, after my muscle car phase, I went into the SCCA and autocross phase. Well, I drove by one day in this neighborhood that was nearby where I worked at a Citgo gas station, and I saw, oh my gosh, that's a Triumph Stag being a car nut, I knew what it was. I knew it had a V8, and that's where I just lost my mind. I
Yeah.
said, a real Triumph Stag. Well, I went up and talked to the guy and talked him into selling it to me. And that one was emerald green, same year, same wheels, same stripe, except it was emerald green with a black stripe.
Okay.
And I had a blast with that car. That car had more of a straight exhaust on it. Had like what we used to call glass packs.
Yeah.
It sounded like a small block Corvette from the 60s. It
Wow.
was the coolest sounding car. Susan's parents used to say, "Here comes Steve up the road when I was coming
I
to
have
see
to tell you,
Susan."
this thing sounds really neat.
It's got a good sound. This one's not as loud. This is more stock.
Yeah.
So fast forward back to when I bought the car. It got here, it had a couple of dings and scratches. Now, it was original paint, so it's not going to be, it was at the time, whatever that is, over 45-year-old paint. The car's now 50 years old this year. And so I like things to be a little nicer than that. So then COVID happened in 2020.
Yes.
Our body shop techs were standing around with nothing to do. I thought, little opportunity.
Perfect timing.
So we did a complete disassembly of this car, and not a restoration, but a complete glass out, body parts apart. Every doors, hood, trunk, everything came off the car, roof.
Wow.
And we did a complete disassembly and refinish, respray of the car in the original magenta color. So what you're seeing is what the car would have looked like brand new. The car had Kumo tires, which that made me crazy when I got here. So these are actual Michelin Coca Reproduction Michelin XAS tires that match the original spare that's in the trunk.
How do you find these things?
So, and underneath this car, it still has where the magenta is oversprayed onto the red oxide on the undercarriage. So the car still has that original look that we retained.
Yeah.
The wheels, I have the original wheels. These are replacement wheels. They're just like factory, but I want them to be a little brighter and nicer. So I replaced the wheels with the original style wheels. The front Stag logo, one of the Stag logos here in the rear. A lot of little deep pieces. Rimmer Brothers in the UK has every part almost for this car because these cars have a tremendous following in Great Britain.
Yeah.
They just love these cars. And another thing we spent a lot of time with is fixing the cooling problem because mine had overheated.
Yeah.
I actually had rebuilt the engine on my car. It's got one ginormous timing chain. I don't remember how long it was, but a big timing chain. I just remember rebuilding that engine and Susan operating the hoist while I'm guiding the engine and trans out of the car back in 40 years ago.
That's funny.
So I was kind of attached to the car. That particular car, as a matter of fact, I sold that car to buy Susan's engagement ring. I took every penny of what I got for that car, and back 40 years ago, $2,750 or something like that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And all of that went to her ring. So I used to tell Susan, my wife, that you have a stag on your finger. So, just last year actually, I finally got her the what they call the big ring.
Yeah.
And I got her the big ring, and I said, well, now you got your ring, and I didn't have to sell my stag.
There you go.
So Norm, let's talk about some of the specifics of this particular car. The green car I had, I mentioned, was just like this, same year.
Yeah.
Except that car actually had a 3-speed Borg-Warner automatic. While I'm talking about the options, these cars have power windows. They have rear defroster in the hardtop, power steering, power brakes. Many of them have air conditioning and aluminum trailing arms with a fully independent rear suspension.
Really?
So this was a pretty high-tech car for its day. And one difference of this car versus the emerald green one I had 40 years ago, even though they both have the same black Naugahyde interior, this one does have a 4-speed manual transmission with the electric overdrive. So the buttons on top of the shifter, you can shift it in 3rd or 4th gear into overdrive. So it's like having a 6-speed.
That is fantastic.
And because of that, this car will run down the highway 70, 75 miles an hour plus.
Yeah.
And so it keeps up with traffic, which is really, really nice. And the Naugahyde interior is original. It's got a great look to it.
It does.
It looks like it's brand new. I did put in new mats. I put in a trunk mat.
Yeah.
And just because I really pay attention to the details.
The gauges are fantastic.
Well, the instrument, we did restore the instruments from the UK. Some of them we actually just replaced the needle because it had a little bit of a fade and it was kind of turned kind of beige, not white. So I like all the instruments and needles to be perfect, which they are.
They are.
But what's really cool is there's a gentleman or a company in the UK that Rimmer Brothers commissions to do the wood. And this is very unusual because it had nice enough wood that was in it, but when you open the glove box door, you can see the difference in what the finish looked like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So I had them make brand new wood veneer for the center console and instrument and glove box area, and most of them that you see when people replace that, it's like a burl wood. Well, that's not what they had. They actually had this type of wood that you see here, kind of a medium light brown. I can't remember if it's maple or what it's made out of.
Whatever it is, it's perfect.
It's absolutely what it would have looked at like when it was brand new.
Even the chrome, the wood, the gauges, the black, the carp, everything in this thing is just like brand new, 1973 brand new.
You can tell that dealer was very proud of this car and took good care of it.
Forever. So he bought it new in 73 and had it till he was 97 years old?
Well, he was the dealer, yeah. He kept it till he was in his 90s. And again, mechanically, Canepa out in California, I think they'd replaced the steering rack and did some suspension pieces, but what we focused on here were the areas that I knew were the weak spot of the Stag, which anybody out there that if you know a Triumph Stag, you know it's cooling. Is because you actually have the water pump is a little bit too high and it starves for water sometimes. So we put in a 4-core radiator and we replaced basically everything in the entire cooling system except the block and the block itself rather. We replaced the radiator, the thermostat, obviously new hoses, just anything connecting to the cooling system we replaced. And also, one thing that's nice about this model, this is a factory air conditioned car.
I was just getting ready to ask, is that
and
air?
It's got a York compressor, which is a similar AC compressor that Ford used to use back in the day. So it's a very reliable, very stout and robust air conditioning compressor.
Wow.
So the air is like ice cold. I drive this car as like right now in July.
Cooling system works perfect. AC.
AC
we live in Florida, and you can drive this thing
electric overdrive, power windows. This is the nicest driving classic car, and I drive a lot of classic cars and have several classic cars. None of them a lot of them outperform this car with horsepower, but they don't really drive nicer than this.
You know, I was going to ask you. I mean, we've done the behind the garage door on your Cortez Silver SS 396 Camaro.
Right.
We've done one on the Resto Mod 68 Camaro.
The orange 68.
We've done the whole documentary on the Boyette Z28.
Right.
You have all these really cool high end cars.
Right.
Yet this one.
This is the one that I like to drive. Like if I get a chance to jump in and drive something, oftentimes it's this car because it's very reliable, it's easy to drive, and people are intrigued by it. They can see that it's something nice because
it's something different.
It is clean and nice, as you can see, but it's something different. It's been called an MG, nice Mustang, nice Spitfire. I've heard them all because people they just aren't very familiar with the car.
Well, like I said, TR8, TR6, Spitfire.
Right.
I had never heard of a Stag until you got this one. Had never heard of one.
And I really feel like it's definitely one of the nicer ones around because I really.
Well, you showed this car.
Yeah, I did take it to the Safety Harbor annual British car show, and it did win first in class. Yeah.
That's how nice it is, and that was a complete, total British car show, and this one took first in class.
Well, for its class, yeah.
That's
There were a
fine.
lot of other British cars that won, but it is a clean, nice car, good driving car, and I parked next to this beautiful red TR6. They ended up winning first in his class.
Oh, yeah.
And when I parked there, that car's not in my class. He got a little bit agitated. It was funny. He turned out to be a real nice guy.
That's funny.
But it was
well, he
funny
didn't want to
that
go up against it.
He did not want to compete with his car, which is kind of funny. But they're very unique. I think they're very classic. I remember from 40 years ago when I had my green one, like when you close the doors, you close the trunk. They're more like something Jag would have made out of British Leyland than something Triumph would have made.
Yeah.
And you can tell
Very
because
high-end.
they really wanted to compete with a Mercedes SL. One of these cars, a yellow one, was actually in a James Bond movie, and that kind of gave the car a little bit of cachet at the time.
Yeah.
And anyhow, it's a pretty well thought of car in the UK.
I don't want to sound completely crazy because you are way more versed in these cars than I am, but it's kind of like a Corvette wrapped in a Triumph because it's got the V8, it's got the 4-speed, it's got the independent rear suspension, it's got that sound, it's got all that stuff, but it's such a neat car.
I remember when I had my automatic, I came across a couple of the manuals, and I thought, oh my gosh, back in the day, if I could only have a manual, because all my other cars I had, as a matter of fact, it was the first automatic car I've ever personally owned was my green Stag.
Yeah.
Every other car had a manual, and so I thought, oh my gosh, how great it would be to have a manual. So I'm actually very happy this has got the manual with overdrive.
So cool.
It makes it very, very fun to drive. It's a very comfortable car, the Naugahyde interior, again, as you mentioned, and I said too, it looks like brand new. I remember teasing Susan that these were made with European Naugas.
Not just
which
any
are very
Naugas.
rare, not just any Naugas, European Naugas. So this is a very, very, high-end interior.
It's back seat, trunk. It's in a removable hardtop plus the soft top as well. What a fantastic car!
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to own it, and it's not worth what I have in it. Like a lot of these cars aren't. It wasn't worth what I paid for it.
But you had to have it.
Because these cars, the range on these cars, an average Stag is going to be between $10,000 and $20,000. A really, really high-end, nicely restored Stag, you start getting into the $25,000 to $35,000 range is all. This car,
do we even want to know?
Is way more valuable, and I have way more in this car.
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider this car for. I'm not interested in selling it.
No.
I didn't do it. I didn't redo the car and buy the car in the first place with a plan on making money as a car dealer. I bought it personally because I wanted it.
It's a sentimental car.
And it's fun to share because people don't really know these cars very well. So it is. It's sentimental. And if it was a real problem and it was aggravating to drive, and you and I talk about classics all the time because you know classics like I do, Norman. If it's not comfortable, if it's not fun to drive, if it's a pain in the butt,
yeah,
you won't mess with it. You either won't drive it and you'll eventually get rid of it.
Just forget about it.
And if this car was that, I wouldn't have it. To this day, I would have cut my losses and I would have gone ahead and sold it. But I have no plans on getting rid of this car. And I've got cars that are worth a lot more than this car.
Yes, you do.
But this is one that is means a lot to me. I enjoy it. As long as people enjoy seeing it and that kind of thing, I'll continue to drive it.
It's sorted. It's detailed.
Well sorted.
It's sentimental. But there's no reason for you to ever get rid of this car. The color still kills me. But
the color is. My son Matt says, "Can't you strip it and paint it green like your original one?" He's like, "Really?" So the color reminds me of the Mopar colors back in the 70s. It was kind of that funky era where they would try colors like this on a car. It's very, very unusual.
So this color is original to this car.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, the hue, this exact hue. This is exactly what magenta looks like. I've got brochures and pictures of other Stags from when they were brand new. Identical to this, look just like this.
Such a fantastic car, and I think it's so all the other cars that you have and all the other cars in your collection, including one that we're not going to mention yet, but I hope that you get to you will let us do a behind the garage door on it. All those cars, your little purple Stag is your go-to.
It's my quirky weird side, I guess, because people scratch their heads when they see me have this car, drive this car. They're like, why would that Chevrolet dealer that sells so many Corvettes? Why would he want a car like that? And well, obviously, when you see it, you're like, he must have had one of those. Well,
there's a reason.
Pretty much true.
There's a reason.
But I'm not kidding you. I tell you all the time, and I know you know this is true, that it just drives so well.
It does.
It's a good driving car, and as long as it continues to work well, I'll continue to drive it and keep it. But I'm very, very happy with it.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing
Thanks,
your
Norm.
1973 Triumph Stag.
Yep.
All right, we're going to head back upstairs and wrap it up. All right, Steve, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful, beautiful Triumph Stag with us. It's remarkable to me, but I guess I kind of get it. I mean, the Camaros and the Corvettes and, all the supercars that he's owned over the years, that little purple Triumph Stag is his absolute favorite, just to get in and go. And it is literally top to bottom, stem to stern, one of the nicest cars that honestly he owns. And it's a show winner. Make sure you keep checking back for another episode of Behind the Garage Door.
Stingray Chevrolet, relax, enjoy the difference.